well, thank you very much for that introduction, Tony. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The bird in question was a wryneck, and it's the only wryneck I've ever seen in Yatton or locally. And the truth of the matter is, first of all, I thought it was a reed bunting because I didn't believe it could be a wryneck. And it had arrived, as a lot of these things do, after a big storm. And I can remember Tony seeing a ring ouzel near the strawberry line after a big storm, and I've yet to see a ring ouzel on the strawberry line. Anyway, to get on with tonight, what we've got, I've got a few pictures to start with about the survey work, and I'll talk briefly about how we do the surveys, why we took on doing the surveys, and then there's pictures of the birds we've seen on the strawberry line survey, and a few extras at the end of birds that you haven't seen on that, which you're likely to see over Yatton. So if we can look at the first survey sheet, please. This is how it all started in 1998. A chap called Eric Olcott from the RSPB Western Group did the production, and you'll see from the next page in a moment that it was all handwritten. You want to stick your signature, Mike Wallington. That's Mike Wallington, who started the survey with me. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, and it's very appropriate. The picture shows him holding one of YACWAG's many barn owlets, because Mike, I think, was the first person to see and record a barn owl in Yatton in 2002 for at least 20 years, and probably quite a lot longer than that, when he saw a barn owl quarter in one of the YACWAG fields. So yeah, Mike was a great sport. I was still working when the survey started, so I was very grateful to have his help in conducting the surveys. Next one. And there's a group of us, and the gentleman there, second from the right in the flat hat, is Mike Keithley, and he's another one of the original people, and again, sadly, no longer with us. You can also see on that picture on the far right, John Croxton, who's our warden at Littlewood, and also Graham and Sue. Graham's the warden at the new Cobthorne Reserve. Okay. And this is how it started. I was quite pleased, I was quite surprised how good my handwriting was in 1998. So we started a form of survey called the Common Bird Census, which was a big British Trust for Ornithology, BTO recognised, where you actually map the birds. And the reason we did that was we wanted to see what would happen when we undertook management work on the strawberry line. For instance, if we took a great legged ditch out, would we lose all our reed warblers forever, or would they move to other areas? So that was the reason we went for this mapping. It was quite a complex system, whereby the birds all have 1 or 2 letter codes. So you write the code down when you see the bird. If it's singing, if it's a male that's singing, you draw a ring round it. If it's calling, you put a line underneath it. And if it flies off, you put an arrow in the direction which it flies. So we used that system for quite a long while, but even the best artificial intelligence, or as my friend John and neighbour says, artificial incompetence, cannot cope with that type of survey. So we've now moved onto a survey that lists all the birds in tabular form. Okay. And this is how 2024 sheep, and a chap called Eric Olcott, as mentioned, from Western, did the original ones until he was about 90. I think he was 90 when he retired, and since then John, who's in the audience tonight, has taken up the production of this. Not only does he do the strawberry line report, we also do a survey of the Littlewood Reserve, and John does all the production of the report for that. We've taken on the North Somerset Levels bird survey, summer and winter, from the now defunct RSPB group in Western, and John does all the work on that. And he's now just started on the Cobthorne survey, which is in its infancy, because the reserve's new, but it'll be very interesting to see how we go on. So, right, next one please, Jim. So there's a map of the route. Initially we set it into lots of small sections, but we learned that that wasn't really necessary, so we've just not got the lettered sections now from A till J. It's not had many changes. We can't now get down the final bit of the original track bed because it's just so overgrown, so we go down the cycle route path where it goes off the old track bed now, but other than that it has stayed the same. Okay. And that's the sort of tabular form we use now, which is much more computer friendly. When we started, you couldn't get to Yatton Station. The section at the Yatton Station engine wasn't part of the Strawberry line, so we did 5. We used to do 5 surveys then on the bit, but once we got the full length of the line out, we now try and do 6 surveys a year. Normally start about the 1st of April, perhaps a day or two before, a day or two after, and go through to the middle of June every 2 or 3 weeks. Picking days when the weather's suitable. I was lucky to be mentored by a chap in Bristol, the late John Tully, who was very good at this, and he always used to say that use a pencil, and if you can't write in your notebook because it's raining, it's time to go home and give up, and it's got to be done. We normally start about 8:30. We haven't found any advantages in starting at dawn, because often it's cold on these spring mornings, and the birds are more interested in feeding than singing, and about 50% of our records are oral. We hear the birds singing and we record them. Okay, Jim? Right, so we go on to the birds, and it's time now to say I don't take any pictures of birds. So all the pictures you're going to see tonight, I think except one, were taken by YACWAG members. And John Tobro's taken a lot, he's in the hall tonight. Mark Savage has provided me a lot. Emily Lomas has provided a lot. Higgy, who's at the Horticultural Society meeting tonight, in competition with us, he's provided a few photos, and there's just 1 or 2 others from members. So the birds we're going through now are the ones that we've seen on the survey over the years. We normally get about 32 species, sometimes on a good day 35, but over the years, going back to 1998, we've seen 70 species altogether. So we're going to go through the 70 species, and they're in taxonomic order, which at one time I used to know, and if the advances in DNA didn't mean it got changed every 6 months, I should still know it, but it's a changing feast. If you could buy a brand new field guide today, this is the order at which the birds would be in. So we start with mute swan. We get mute swans around the Strawberry line in the ditches and the new reen at the end. There's a lot more mute swans in the area than there are territories, so you get a lot of unmated birds hanging around in the summer, and we sometimes get quite a lot of birds in the winter that come out onto the levels. Okay. Mallards, again, we get mallards in the ditches and the pond at the bottom of Chescombe Road. Nothing very dramatic. We sometimes record 2 or 3 going along the Strawberry line. I'm sure we miss a lot more that are sitting quietly nested in the ditches. They're not really very successful. They never keep all the young, but they do produce lots of young, and the numbers seem to be reasonably stable, perhaps a slight decline. Okay. Yeah, pheasants. Well, what do we say about pheasants? They like this is a sensible pheasant. It's flown away from the pheasant shoot area and probably landed on a YACWAG field. They do like our fields because they've got long grass that they can hide in, and they sometimes scare the wits out of us when they suddenly jump up in front of us when we're walking across the field. Apparently 40 million pheasants are released in Britain for shooting every year. That is an incredible number. It's thought to be about 84 million wild birds in Britain and 40 million pheasants released. As I say, the sensible ones fly away and land in the YACWAG fields and surrounding area, and they seem to breed quite happily. We've probably got a small sustaining population there. They don't, in low numbers, they don't cause any problems, but in some areas, such as on the Dorset Heath and they'll eat the lizards and the small snakes and that, and cause a lot of ecological damage. There are most birds that are introduced by man are not good news for our native birds. I'll say a bit more about that later. Okay, John. Swifts, as many of you know, that YACWAG's instigated a Swift project, and there's lots of Swift boxes that have been put up in Yatton and Congsbury. Indeed, if I can get my directions right, I'm not really sure it is, but somewhere out there is the poshest Swift box of the lot. A three or four chamber, I can't remember which, big long nest box with the chambers in, made out of fiberglass, indestructible, and Greg and the chapel people kindly allowed to put it on the chapel. The reason it's a good site is that there's always been a colony in Wakedean Gardens, which is right next to it. And one of the ladies we know's down there's got a swift box and has had swifts nested in it. So we're desperately hoping, it's only about a couple of 100 yards, that they will come and use this box. But swifts have declined and still appear to be declining. The experts seem to think it's because they've lost all the nesting spaces. But I wonder if the lack of aerial insects might not also be playing a part. So we'll see how the YACWAG swift boxes do and hope for the best. Okay, John. Cuckoo. We used to regularly record cuckoo on the strawberry line survey in the early years. They nested well, cuckoos don't nest, but there was a young cuckoo being fed by a reed warbler one year, sort of 5 metres from the strawberry line. They're obviously using the line. But gradually over the years, they've just declined. We haven't had any in Yatton regularly for a few years. There was one at Congsbury by the golf course, that's dispersed. So I don't see cuckoos now any nearer than the big reserves on the Somerset levels, the Avalon Marshes. Not really sure entirely why it is, although again it seems to be linked with the fact that there's not enough prey for the adults. It's certainly not a lack of reed warbler nest, because when we come onto the warblers, the reed warblers, which are the birds that the cuckoos use or did use in this area, lots of reed warblers, so it's not a shortage of host species. Okay. Stock dove. This was the only picture I couldn't source from any of our members, and Mariel, who works for the RSPB, found this from a colleague or a friend of theirs. So this is a stock dove. Member of the pigeon family. They do like our owl boxes. Their stock doves are hole nesters, so unlike wood pigeons and collared doves that we'll come on to, that build flimsy and pretty useless nests, these birds nest in holes in trees. There's not so many of those, so they tend to go into our owl boxes. They're quite shy, and you're not going to see them around very much, and they look very much like a pigeon, to be honest. But they're a worthwhile species. I mean, we hate it when we get squirrels in our owl boxes, but stock doves are all right. And they often nest either before the owls or after the owls. They'll use the box in the same season. And in Littlewood one year, we even had tawny owl nested, and they finished, and stock dove nested, and then barn owls nested, all in the same nest box in one season. Okay, wood pigeon next, I suspect. Ugh. What do we say about wood pigeons? Somebody was talking to me earlier on about, I mean, they're just everywhere. And I mean, wood pigeons never used to come into gardens, but they're a real generalist species. They'll inhabit pasture, they'll inhabit arable, they'll inhabit forest. You even get some on the sort of on the lower uplands. There's nowhere where you don't see wood pigeons, and they just become so bold. And I think that's the birds that are doing well are the ones that are bold and can live alongside human beings. So we're now getting these big migrations in the autumn of birds from the north, whether they're north of Britain or further north, I'm not really sure, that sweep across us in the autumn. I counted 2,000 going over Wembley without trying it about a month ago, and that was eclipsed by the 110,000 that Portland Bird Observatory counted flying out to sea off Portland Bill. So that just gives you some idea about how many wood pigeons there are about. The numbers on the strawberry line are going up and up. They obviously nest, they've got nests along the strawberry line, we record all those, and the numbers are just on an upward trend, as you would expect. Okay. And collared dove numbers have gone down. Collared doves didn't come into the UK till the 1960s, 1970s, and they moved in from Eastern Europe. They were well, a vagrant before then, and they did very well in gardens. But I wonder if the bigger wood pigeons have ousted them. They also seem a bit dozy to me, and they're very, very vulnerable to capture by sparrowhawks, which the wood pigeons aren't. Wood pigeons are so big. The female sparrowhawk will take a wood pigeon, but the males are too small to take them, whereas males and females will take these. And the wood pigeons are pretty streetwise, but these don't seem to be the same, and the numbers have definitely gone down. we get a few on the strawberry line that emanate from the farm, from Rectory Farm. And of course Rectory Farm is now closed, and it'll be interesting to see if we lose their collared doves on the strawberry line, and indeed our house sparrows as well, and possibly some of the swallows that used to nest there. Okay. Water rail, one of the winter visitors of the strawberry line. We get the non-breeding birds because we start the surveys, as I say, right at the end of March or the beginning of April. There's a big crossover of birds that are really winter birds that are still around, and water rails one of them. They like the ditches with the hawthorns growing over them. They're very secretive. They've got this loud squealing call, said to be like a pig being stuck. Not that I've ever heard a pig being stuck, but you can certainly hear them. And the other times, if you get any frosty weather, and they'll run around on the ice then. Slim little birds, but rarely come out into the open. But I imagine there's probably 2 or 3 individuals each winter down the length of the strawberry line, which I should have said is from Yatton Station almost to the A370, currently to the Norton's Field Reserve. Okay. And then moorhens like the ditches, and some little pondlets that Tony got constructed where the ditches have been widened out, and the moorhens nest in those. They're not very successful with their young either. Everything eats them, but they will nest 3 or even 4 times a year. So the numbers are pretty good at the moment, and they're an indicator species. When we had lots of problems with mink, moorhens were pretty much extinct around here. So we would know if there were difficulties with mink, the moorhen numbers would drop, and that would almost certainly be the case. There are obviously much less number of otters around, but otters generally wouldn't worry moorhens like mink would. Okay. Lapwings, a nice flock of lapwings. I think it's one of them in these pictures. So the YACWAG logo has got the lapwing on it, and I think when we started, we had great plans that we were going to restore the lapwings to Congsbury Moor. And it never happened, and it's probably not surprising because lapwings have been in decline ever since, and even the RSPB now is having great difficulty in conserving them on its Grey Lake Reserve, which is about 1,000 acres and is surrounded by a 4-kilometre electric fence to keep foxes and badgers out. And I think one of the problems is that current farming methods and methods that took over from the late 20th century favour the corvids, particularly carrion crows, and small colonies of lapwings just can't cope if there are crows around. I mean, the colony at Grey Lake in the RSPB Reserve got up to about 20 pairs, but there are very few nesting now, and as I say, they take all these control measures. It's just difficult to know. But in winter, there's thousands of them down there. We used to get lapwings regularly on the moors in winter, and that doesn't happen very much now. They seem to be building huge flocks in the very, very large reserves, presumably on a safety in numbers basis. There's a few attempt to breed down bottom of Wembley, normally on arable, or there's some maize fields that they try and nest on, but most years I'm afraid they're not successful. They're very long-lived birds. Once a lapwing gets to 1 year old, there's a good chance it'll get to 10 or even 20. So they don't need to produce that many young, but it's very difficult for them when the Wembley birds, I think there were only about 5 or 6 birds, perhaps 3 pairs at the best. So there we are. We tried with lapwings, but we got barn owls instead. Right. And say something about the gulls. We obviously somehow got a lesser black-backed gull on the survey. They don't nest there, but they nest on the factories near here. They're nominally summer visitors, but with warming winters, we get more of them around in winter. There's probably more lesser blackbacks than herring gulls. Herring gulls also nest on the factory roofs, and have indeed nested on 1 or 2 domestic properties, and do nest on domestic properties in the Weston-super-Mare, which is not appreciated by the owners, I'm sure. Enough said about gulls. Now, Harry, this is a very good picture. I don't know if you can see that. There's some things that even Sir David Attenborough couldn't explain. This is a heron being shepherded out of the co-op in Yatton. You tell me. It just seems utterly incredible. Steve Sannins took the picture, a friend of mine. It was nearly out the door for the top of the picture. And he said it seemed perfectly okay. The last he saw it, it were walking through the car park, heading sort of up towards Cadbury Hill. It's just unbelievable, really, that because none of the herons here are particularly attenuated to people. I mean, if you go to something like Slimbridge, they're used to people walking by them. You could almost sort of explain it there. So, anyway, to tell you about herons, all the herons we get locally come from the long-established heronry at Cleve. It's moved a bit, but it's been there for hundreds of years in the same area. It has about 25 to 30 pairs of grey herons. As I say, the ones we see here all come from there. And despite the fact that they're now getting competition from egrets, the grey herons seem to be pretty much holding their own. And they'll use the ditches down alongside the strawberry line for feeding any ditches and reeds that we've got with fish in, although they're also quite happy to go out in the centre of fields and feed on frogs and worms and mice, anything they can find. Very Catholic eaters, the grey herons. Okay. And little egrets, lots of little egrets around at the moment. As soon as in winter, as soon as the reeds are dropped to winter level, that provides a lot of food, and the egrets move in. There's a lot on the little river at the moment, Emily tells me. Not so many in the summer. As far as we know, they don't nest very locally. One or two might nest with the herons at Cleve, but it's very difficult to see. They're late nesters, so if they do nest, the trees will be in full leaf, so you can't see it. There's some that nest down on the Somerset level. Got to be careful now. We're starting to get cattle egrets, which are the same size and look very similar. Okay. Yeah, sparrowhawk. Well, taken in a garden, that's where they are. That's where all the small birds are. Sparrowhawks usually nest near the old railway bridge on Wembley Lane, near the railway line, and they'll hunt down the strawberry line. There's normally another pair somewhere on the gang wall. There's normally another pair on Cadbury Hill, and I suspect, but I don't know, there'll be another pair somewhere round the back of Stowey Road. So they'll have between them they'll have Yatton covered, and there'll be some of but most of the time, as I say, they're going to be in gardens because that's where the birds are. And when birds are feeding at bird feeders, they're not so much looking for sparrowhawks, but they do shoot down the strawberry line. They're great opportunities. They've got to be to stay alive really. They were nearly wiped out in the 1950s by DDT and pesticides. They come back, but numbers have dropped since. But small bird numbers have dropped, and once prey numbers dropped, their predators are going to drop. You know, it's the same with all prey-predator relationships, whether it's birds or lions and gazelles and things like that in Africa. Okay, so that's sparrowhawk. I expect got buzzard next. Well, when we came to Yatton in 1981, there were a few buzzards in the Gordano Valley, and that was about it. In 1800, buzzards stretched right across England. There wasn't an area of England that didn't have buzzards nested. Then somebody invented shotguns, and by the 1950s, 1960s, they were confined. There were quite a lot in Scotland, but they were confined to the hills of Wales, Dartmoor, Exmoor, Yatlands, and some of the coastal areas. But persecution stopped, and the buzzards came back, and they're now the most common bird of prey in the UK, about 85,000 pairs estimated at the latest count. For years Kestrel was the leader, but that's gone down into second place. So again, they'll nest around the strawberry line area and hunt over the strawberry line. There's quite a few small mammals actually on the strawberry line, and obviously on the sides and that. So buzzards and indeed barn owls will hunt over the strawberry line edges. Okay. Barn owl, yeah. Well, there we are. We've produced about 90 barn owl chicks from the YACWAG reserves, and another 15 or so from boxes that we've got on friends and neighbours really, so it's been a phenomenal success. I think the first box was put up in about 2000, and some kestrels nested in it 2002, and the first nesting was 2004, and we've got advice from Chris Sperring from the Hall Canal Trust, and he told us to put up a second box, which we did, because they needed one for the other birds, the male to roost in, while the female was nesting. And as YACWAG acquired more land, we put up more boxes. So we've now got 5 boxes on Congsbury Moor, and we've got 2 on the Stowey Reserve. And the kestrels use them, and I'll talk a bit about that. But the barn owls do well when there's lots of small mammals. When YACWAG got its first field, it did nothing, and that was a good ecological move. We just let the grass grow. It had been pasture for years and years, but once the grass had grown, the field voles in particular and small mammals started to come back, and that's the driving force. If there are good numbers of small mammals, the barn owls will breed. If there's millions and millions of small mammals, they'll breed twice in 1 year. But if there are low numbers of small mammals, they simply sit it out and don't breed because they know they're not going to bring any young. And if there's a crash when they're breeding, unfortunately they fail. So it's very irregular. This year we had 5 young on Congsbury Moor and 2 on Stowey, which is probably average plus. Because some years we get none at all. I think the most we've ever had in a year was something like 9. So yeah, 7 was quite good. They're not very long-lived birds, unfortunately. Although they produce good numbers of young, they're very accident-prone, and the average lifespan, even if you forget the ones that die before they're a year old, which is most of them, they probably only live to 4 or 5, most of them. There are some records of them 10 years old. They're not like tawny owls, when a lot of tawny owls will live to 10 years old once they've actually reached adulthood. Okay. And this is Emily's picture of a little owl. I've put that in because it was taken on a misty morning not far from here, near the Little River, and I never knew there were little owls in the area of the Little River. And little owls were introduced in Victorian times as a sort of, some say they were introduced on game estates. I get that, but they were brought in from southeast Europe. The good thing about them is at least they're European birds, they're not being brought from China or America, and so they do seem to fit in fairly well. There's a pair that nest on or near Stowey Reserve, never seen, occasionally heard. They seem to have got much shyer over the years. They used to sit up on telegraph posts on the Moor Road quite readily on summer evenings, but they won't sit out in the open now. They've definitely become much more elusive, but there's probably more around than we know. I know that there are some in the Clavering area. I've been told about those, and say whether this is a pair or a youngster looking for a site, I don't really know. But and we have had pairs not necessarily nesting, but seen near the strawberry lime. So that's a little owl. Okay. Yeah, well, what was it? Somebody was telling me today that some contractors had come down Wemburn Lane in their van and said to the farmer, he said, "Hey, we saw this bird. It followed us down the green. It was blue and green. Do you know what it was?" And he said, "Well, there's only one bird that's blue and green, kingfish." Kingfishers are around in low numbers. Our rivers and that don't suit them particularly well, because what they really need is a vertical bank to nest in, and you'll notice the reeds and the rivers don't have vertical banks. But there are a few around. The Little River's a place you see them. The River Yeo up towards Congsbury, and indeed the other side of Congsbury towards Iwood and that spaces. And the places we've logged them on the surveys when we caught them on the new Reen, where the strawberry line path goes off the truck bed onto the drove to go out to the A370. They haven't been affected recently by hard winters, but I think if there's a lot of rain, that makes feeding difficult for them. But they're still around and a joy to see. Okay. Great spotted woodpecker. great spotted woodpeckers numbers have gone up and up and up. They're in absolute record numbers now, so we get those regularly on the strawberry line. I think they probably nest on the gang wall mainly, but they come onto the strawberry line to feed. And feeding in summer full of incidentally does include eating things like blue tits and things like that. So lots of people who don't like magpies and who don't even like sparrowhawks don't think we ought to be getting rid of our woodpeckers, even though they predate birds at some time as well. It's all part of nature. So they've come on to garden feeders, so probably a lot of you get them in your gardens. You know, they've got this winter food source. It must be helping them. We usually get them on the Littlewood Reserve. They normally nest on there. Sometimes they go into the woodland across the fields there. But yeah, so great spotted woodpecker is doing very well, and I think the next slide will probably be green woodpecker. It is. And there's been a lot of green woodpeckers around this year. The rain bird, when they yaffle, it's supposed to mean that it's going to rain, and much more often heard than seen. I've heard lots of them round Yatton this year, or I've had lots of soundings of them. I suspect there's only probably 4 or 5 pairs. Cadbury Hill's a place for them, but they're not really linked to trees like great spotted woodpeckers are. But they'll come onto the strawberry line. There's still the remains of a few anthills on the strawberry line. They do love feeding on ants. More of an early morning bird there because the line gets busy now. When we started doing the survey in 1998, it was nowhere near as busy with people and dogs as it is now. But yeah, so quite pleasing to see green woodpeckers, and I heard one calling near our Kenmore Reserve today. Okay. So kestrel. When we put the barn owl boxes up, specifically designed for barn owls, the first thing we got in was a kestrel in 2002, I think. And kestrels have produced about 50 young, something over 50 young on the YACWAG owl boxes. And in some ways, it's more important than the barn owl because kestrels suffered quite a severe decline. I mean, at one time, there were 80,000 pairs of kestrels in the country, and that was more than every other species of bird of prey put together. But they're now down, they think, to about 50,000. Probably a lot of loss of habitat. If you think back to, they were known as the motorway kestrel because you always used to see them by the motorways, but the grass verges to the motorways are now shrubbed up, so they're in the rough grassland that they need to hunt on. And of course, they feed on much the same things in much the same way as buzzards, so they've got competition for food there. And indeed, they feed on the same thing as a barn owl, so everything's going for the same sort of prey. But we thought we'd be clever and put some proper kestrel boxes up. And what happened? Not a thing. We've never had a kestrel go into a box designed for kestrels, but put a barn owl box up there, and they're in like a flash. So it just shows that humans don't know that much about it. Okay. And now one of my favourite birds, the hobby. The hobby. Hobbies are summer visitors, scarce birds, probably only 2,000 or 3,000 pairs in the UK. It used to be limited to lowland heaths. It was New Forest and Hampshire that you had to go, but weather's warmed up, they've moved up, and this one was not this one, but this picture was taken at Claverham, but by a former member. They'll hunt over the strawberry line. They feed mainly on insects when they first arrive at the end of April on the big Somerset levels. They'll feed on tiny little insects, St Mark's flies. We reckon they must need about 5,000 of those a day to keep them going because there's nothing on them. And then when the dragonflies emerge, they'll feed on dragonflies. Then if they breed particularly, they'll go on to the hirundines then, swallows and house martins. And ones we've had this year near Kingston Seymour have been seen raiding the house martin, or attempting to raid the house martin colonies over the Chestnut Park estate, and attempted to raid the swallow nests in some of the stables down Wimbram Lane. But anyway, some of you may remember the football game called Subbuteo. What's that got to do with birds? Subbuteo, anybody remember that? Yeah. Well, that was named after the hobby, because the chap who invented Subbuteo was a bird watcher. And the Latin name of this bird is Falco subutio. And he said, well, table football's a hobby, so I'll call it subutio. I don't know Latin, but I think subutio means small buzzard. So they can misname birds in Latin as well as they can misname them in English. But yeah, cracking birds, mercurial in flight, can turn on a sixpence. And we're hoping that the birds that we saw around the Kingston Seymour area will return next summer. They're very late nesters. They don't start nesting till the middle of June, usually in an old crow's nest after the crows have had their young and gone. They use old crow's nest, middle of June, lay their eggs, young hatch middle of July, young fly middle of August, about another 6 weeks practicing and then off to Africa. Okay. Jay. Now, you never used to be able to see a jay. I mean, jays were absolutely scared of people. They expected everybody to go around with a gun because they were mercilessly persecuted because they're a member of the Corvid family. But again, they'll come to gardens now. A lot of you will have had jays in your garden, and they nest in any of the scattered woodlands and areas that probably on Gang Wall and certainly in the woodlands by the station. So yeah, jays. Probably after the kingfisher, one of our most colourful birds. Okay. And what can I say about the corvids? Well, magpies. Nobody likes magpies, do they? And magpies are on the up. For what our survey showed and the other surveys, although people used to complain about there being a lot, for 20 years magpie numbers never moved. They were completely stable locally, but the last 5 years they have gone up. And I suspect that's because there's less trapping by landowners. I don't know that. I can't think of any other reason why the numbers should have gone up so much. They nest on the strawberry line. They don't do a great lot of damage on the strawberry line. The blackbirds on the strawberry line build their nests securely in hawthorn thickets, and the magpies don't get many of them. It's when they come into people's gardens and the blackbirds build a nest on a drain pipe in the open. It's open invitation to the magpies. We've put robin nest boxes up with open fronts. It's a waste of time because the magpies will just go straight in there if the robins attempt to nest in them. So there we are. I'm afraid magpies are on the up. Yep. And jackdaws. Well, what can you say about jackdaws? It ought to be, if Yatton had a bird on its sign, it ought to have the jackdaw, hadn't it? I reckon there's at least 500, probably 600 jackdaws around Yatton, because when you see them fly off towards Kingston Seymour to roost in winter, it's just a great flock. And we were in Littlewood this morning, and there's lots of bird poo spatter there. So whether some of them are roosting in Littlewood, I don't know. But if you've got a house with a chimney in Yatton that ain't got a covering on, you'll get jackdaws in there. And on more than one occasion, I've been called out to try and release jackdaws from chimneys, and be told not to make a mess on the carpet after it's come down. After it's come down with all the soot on it. So there we are. There's jackdaws for you. Okay. And carrying crows. I saw some crows eating hawthorn berries. That's why they're so successful. They're just generalists. They will eat anything, and that's why they've done so well. And we complain about the lack of farmland birds. The big 50-acre field at the bottom of Wembram Lane last winter when it got wet, and it had some slurry put on it, it had got 1,200 big gulls and about 200 crows on it. And you think, well, if you put that out into chaffinches or linnets or yellowhammers, what would that equate to? Sort of 25,000, 30,000 birds. So the food is there in the fields, but it's just being scooped up by these bigger birds. And yeah, that's carrying crows. So a few of those nest on the strawberry line, and they're patrolling it all the time. Okay. And ravens gone up by about 1,000%. Ravens followed the buzzard, really. Ravens, there were no ravens here. There just were no ravens. And gradually they've come in, and in no time at all, they're very competent nesters. They're very, very successful at raising young. And again, a dead sheep attracted 22 ravens on Congsbury Moor. So they're very good for clearing up mess. I'm not sure how much they eat as live birds, but I mean, last year somebody saw 90 on a field in the Gordano Valley, and he was apologetic he could only get 75 in his photograph. You just think, well, you know, the food has got to be there for them. Again, I think there were ravens. You could see ravens on Exmoor and Dartmoor and Bodmin Moor and the uplands and round the coast of southwest England. And I think, you know, there was a level of persecution that's stopped or been much reduced, and they've decided it's safe to move on to the lower ground and have found that they're doing okay there. And you hear, because you hear the deep because they fly around, and there's a pair nesting somewhere at the back of the strawberry line. Okay. Not much I can say about blue tits. That's an authoritative shot, one in a garden at a nest box. We've got nest boxes up in the Yatton Junction part of the strawberry line, the bit where there's the scrubby woodland near to Yatton Station, and so the blue tits go in there. But other than that, there's just odd pairs down the line. There's an old bat box about halfway down. They like nesting in bat boxes. Don't read anything you see in the books about how big the hole needs to be. They can get into tiny holes. They get into holes half the size they're supposed to be able to in bat boxes. So yeah, they kept going by gardeners, and the BTO now think that what happens with the birds that we get in the countryside, say in Littlewood, their young come into the gardens in winter to feed, and then they don't go back to the countryside. They think there's this move. That's how the population's moving from the wider countryside to the towns, cities and villages. Okay. Great tits are the bully boys of the bird feeders, and they're doing extremely well. They're doing so well, some of them are now becoming double brooded. The tits traditionally just had one brood when the caterpillars came out, but great tits now are great tits now. Some of them are having second broods, and again they use their nest boxes in Yatton Junction and seem to be thriving. All right. Skylark. We still get a few skylarks over the fields. Over Mark Britton's fields in particular attract skylarks. He's got big wider fields than YACWAG's got, and there's one or two pairs of skylarks are there, some further out towards the motorway. And again, they'll certainly come and sing over the strawberry line. They don't nest there because they nest on the ground, of course, and the numbers seem to be, they're in low numbers, but the numbers seem to be holding up at this low level. I suppose the best I can say is they don't seem to be getting any worse. They start singing towards the end of February, and they'll go on right until the end of July. A beautiful song, of course. It's called Lark Ascended. So got one of the longest song periods of any of our local birds. Right. And Sand Martin, well, that was a fluke. We had to put Sand Martin in. I think it was early April. There was some really bad weather, and some Sand Martins had come down over the pond at the halfway down the strawberry line. So that was included as we had recorded them once, and I think that was only once in 25 years. There's a few birds coming up like that now. So Sand Martins are just passage migrants, more likely to be seen in the autumn actually, when you'll get odd ones mixing in with the house martins and swallows. Enough said about Sand Martins. And swallows, John managed to get this picture of adult feeding a youngster at Clevedon on the wires. I'd never seen that before. So these probably be birds from further north that were moving down channel, making their way south, and the parents were still feeding the youngster as they went along. Again, as I said, Rectory Farm's closed now, and Rectory Farm was a source of swallow nests, so whether we should see so many swallows feeding over the strawberry line from now on, I'm not sure. Okay. And that's a house martin in a nest on Chestnut Park Estate, just up the road here. Quite a nice colony of house martins has developed there, despite the fact the experts saying they won't nest in new houses, or if it's got plastic UPVC fascia boards and all this. They've made themselves at home. I think there's one or two nest boxes or nest cups been put up for them. It may be, of course, that the fact out on the new estate, they're next to the fields where they can go and hunt, and got the little river for mud and that if they want it for the nest. But Chestnut Park Estate's been designed pretty well for birds. There's lots of darlings, lots of sparrows, these, and one or two more exotic birds from time to time as well. Okay, so House martins again feed over the strawberry line. This is Chetty's warbler. Chetty's warblers first nested in Britain in, I think, the early 1970s. They turned up in the strawberry line about 20 years ago, having gone to the Somerset levels. They're unusual in that all of the Chetty's warblers are with us all year. They're residents. A few chiffchaffs, but nearly all of our other warbler species are summer visitors. We get a few chiffchaffs that winter, and we get blackcaps that winter, but they're not the same ones that we get in the summer. So Chetty's warbler is the one with the explosive song that'll sort of make you jump if you're standing next to the bush. They're very skulking. I think this is one of Mark's pictures, and a lovely picture it is too. Lovely chestnut bird, and you can't see it on there, but they've got 2 extra tail feathers from all the other warblers, but unless you've got it in your hand, you'd never know that. They're doing well. There's about 5 pairs now between the section that we cover, and I think they move up and down the line. They'll sort of follow you up and down the line. They're quite difficult to count in as much as you've got to be careful you didn't count the same ones twice, but as the numbers build up, it'll be much more difficult for them to move up and down the line because they'll be running into the next territory and soon be chuffed off. But the last year or two, we've noticed more of them nesting in the hedges and the scrubby ditches out on the fields. They used to be pretty much confined to the line itself, but they're spreading out. They're doing very well. Thank you. Long-tailed tits do all right. I saw a flock of about 15 down there the other week. Usually 1 or 2 pairs probably nesting along the line. We don't always record them. They can be secretive. Have to be careful because this is a species where the relatives of the parent birds will help. So you'll get uncles and aunts also feeding the young. So if you see 6 long-tailed tits in April, it doesn't necessarily mean there's 3 pairs. It might mean there's 1 pair with 4 helper birds. But yeah, they're doing okay. And again, you'll be getting those in your gardens. I mean, they were almost entirely insectivorous birds until people started putting peanuts out. And of all things, they started eating peanuts. And now they're happy to come to seed and feed on seed as well. Okay. So we're getting into the true warblers now. This is a willow warbler. So, and we can tell it's a willow warbler because it's got palish legs. And if you can see palish legs in the field, you're a better person than I am. So willow warblers are basically just a passage bird on the strawberry line. They'll stop for a few days, they'll sing. Occasionally we'll get one that'll sing for a month or 2. We've had no evidence of breeding, but it's possible they have bred locally. As a species, the willow warblers are moving northwest, so there's a lot more in Scotland now than there were 20 years ago, and a lot less here. They do nest nearby. Certainly, until recently, they've nested up at the top of Goblin Combe, and there's good numbers of them on the Avalon marshes, on the big reserves there. But yeah, we've had them in Littlewood some years that the males have been singing for 6 weeks or so. We've never really been sure whether they've actually nested or not. We've never seen any direct evidence of it. So that's willow warbler, and that's a chiffchaff, and you can't see it on there, but that's got dark legs, except some chiffchaffs have pale legs just to make a difference. So the only way I can tell them apart is the song. The willow warbler's got these descending notes, as one of our volunteers, Bob Evans, says, sounds like it's dying. Whereas the chiffchaff, it does at least sing its name. It just goes chiffchaff, 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 usually finishes with a chiff. So chiffchaffs are doing extremely well. Numbers are going up. We're up to probably about 15 breeding pairs on part of the strawberry line, and they're nested on the edge and almost into the village. What you find is a lot of these birds are getting more confident coming into contact with people, and they're moving more and more into the village, and the chiffchaff's one of those. So a few of them winter, and we think that they do stay over. They're short distance migrants. They come from southern Europe, so usually one of the first harbingers of spring. They'll start singing here about the middle of March, whereas the other birds that are coming from North Africa, or indeed the other side of the Sahara, come much later. So yeah, chiffchaffs, 1 or 2 in gardens, but big numbers of them around where you've still got the old-fashioned sewage works, or anywhere where there's lots of flies and insects. Then there seem to be lots of wintering chiffchaffs around. Okay. And sedge warbler. So we're on to the sedge warblers. Sedge warbler numbers have dropped off, and it's very difficult to tell with these migrant birds whether it's what happens in the 4 months they're here, or whether it's the 3 or 4 months that they're on migration each way, or whether it's the 4 months that they're in Africa. But our sedge warbler, we've only got one regular pair now on the strawberry line, and another one a little way off it. They do seem to use the same habitat as Chettish warblers. And Chettish warblers, of course, are there all year, so they're already on their territory when the sedge warblers come in, and they're also quite a bit bigger than sedge warblers. So whether they've been bossed out by the Chettish warblers, we don't know, but it could be numbers that these African birds, the numbers may pick up. And nice little birds with big eye stripe, and they'll perform these song flights, so they're easier to see than some of the other warblers. Okay. And I have to look at my notes to see what that one is. I think that's the grasshopper warbler. Reed warbler. It's a dark reed warbler. Thank you. So reed warblers are the main warbler species, really, and the numbers they've done very well. We've had up to 22 singing males on the section, normally about 18. It begs the question about how many birds are really there. I mean, if we hear 18 singing males, there's surely going to be 1 or 2 that are not singing. But is it 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6? It's difficult to say. So really, when we're counting, we're producing trends. We're not telling you how many are actually there on the line. We're never going to get all of them, but we can tell you whether there's more than last year and what the trend is. Okay. And this is the grasshopper warbler, known to bird watchers as the gropper. And this is a well-known bird. If you heard this singing, you'd think it was a grasshopper. It just got this little reeling call that goes on and on and on. It's a rare passage migrant. Often just comes for a day, sings and moves on. But the late Richard Hunt, who used to walk the line way before it was an official footpath, said that about 5 or 6 years after the railway closed, all this rank grassland had come up, and it hadn't got completely overgrown with bushes and that. And he reckoned there were 5 or 6 pairs of grasshopper warblers singing on the first stretch where all the bushes are now at Yatton Junction. As I say, it does sound just like a grasshopper. We have had them. We had one stay on the Congsbury Moor for a couple of months, and it may well have nested. They're just so secretive, without causing disturbance. You couldn't possibly know, but generally it's a day or 2 and then moved on. Okay. And this is a garden warbler, completely misnamed. I expect it perhaps went into huge vicars' gardens in Victorian times. You certainly won't see it in a garden now. And these again are just passage migrants, although they do nest down on the Somerset levels. The strawberry line is important, not just for breeding birds, but it is a stopover place for birds in spring and in autumn, and indeed provides food in winter. And so the fact that you get in all these species, albeit irregularly, shows what a valuable resource it is. Often caused by bad weather. Birds are flying over and hit some bad weather, they come down, they've got to find somewhere suitable to feed and rest up before they continue. Okay. And my favourite of all the warblers, the lesser white-throat. I don't know, I think this was one of Mark's. I don't know how I managed to get a picture of that, because they're skulkers as well. So these are different from most of our warblers. Most of our warblers, the chiffchaff, as I say, comes from southern Europe, blackcap from North Africa. Nearly all the others come from the other side of the Sahara and West Africa. But this comes from Ethiopia, right across Central Europe. And they've got a funny little, well, it's called a song. It's not a song, it's just a rattle. And it's got some quieter notes that you've got to be very close to hit. They've like the bushes and the hawthorns have grown up, and that's what favours them. They like tall hedges. So there's usually 1, sometimes 2 pairs, but they do move around. The reed warblers are easy to census because they get on a patch and they stick to it. And a lot of the others, the common white-throats go a little way, the sedge warblers stick to it, the black-caps don't go far, but these blokes, you'll catch them one day, and the next day you hear one 4 yards away, and you think, yeah, but I didn't hear the one where I did before, and they do seem to move around a lot, but they've been with us all throughout the survey, so, you know, they're sort of holding their own. But if you do get to see them, I think they're very attractive little birds, and it's a funny little song. And the fact that these, say, they come all the way from Ethiopia is something to behold, really. Okay. And black-cap, you'll get black-caps in your garden, a lot of you in winter, but the black-caps in winter are birds from Central Europe. These are birds that, these are summer birds that come in from southern Africa. And again, what we're finding is that they're nesting closer and closer to houses and villages. They're becoming more and more attuned to human habitation. But they're doing okay, sort of 10 or a dozen pairs down the strawberry line, and seem to be breeding successfully. Lovely song, of course, the black cap, beautiful song, very varied notes, almost as good as the nightingale, really. Okay. And common whitethroats, they're much more obliging. They perch up and they sing up and fly, so they like the more scrubby areas. So one of the things with the strawberry we try and do is try and get some sort of slightly different areas of habitat. So they tend to like the bit we can't get up now, up the far end towards the river, where there's some more open scrub. But they also nest on Congsbury Moor, the reserve. What they really want is hedges to nest in and plenty of insects, and there's lots of YACWAG fields, being organic of course, can provide plenty of insects. Okay, and goldcrest. Well, the best place to see goldcrest in Yatton is in the High Street. Any of the big houses in the High Street that have got conifers in will have goldcrests in, and a lot of them will have coal tits in as well. But yeah, 1 or 2 goldcrests, strawberry line, usually around where the gang wall joins it. There's sometimes a pair there, and more frequently down in the section towards the A370, along with the wren and the rare firecrest, Britain's smallest bird. I can't hear them there. They go out of, they've got a very high pitched song, and they're now out of my hearing, I'm afraid. Okay. And wrens are in unprecedented numbers. They're obviously not worried about all the wet we've had over the winters. The fact that we haven't had any cold has done them a power of good. I think we counted 33 wrens singing down the section. They've just gone up and up and up. You wonder what the limit's going to be. And I'll have to say the same thing about I could cover wren and robin. They've both done extremely well over the last few years. Numbers have been continually on the rise. And I think certainly some years ago the BTO said that wrens were the most widespread bird in the UK. They measured it in 10 kilometre squares, the whole of the UK, and there were wrens in more 10 kilometre squares than any other species. Okay. Yeah, tree creeper, mostly on Cadbury Hill, but they do come onto the strawberry line. Again, gang war's got all the big trees, and they move up there onto the strawberry line occasionally. I don't imagine they nest. They nest in Littlewood, and we've never found where they nest. They're just so secretive. But yeah, tree creepers seem to be holding them, but they more at home, as I say, in Cadbury Hill, where there's lots of big trees. Okay. And blackbird, what can I say about starling? What can I say about starlings? That the numbers of breeding birds have declined. Again, we got some special starling boxes, specially made for starlings. Never had any joy with those whatsoever. But they're doing all right on the Chestnut Park estate now. They're perhaps making a bit of a comeback. They come onto the strawberry line when they're feeding their young, so they'll feed on the adjacent fields and also take food from the hedges and fly back to the roofs of Yatton where they've got young. Of course, we still get large numbers in winter. But one of the things I've noticed the last month, I don't know whether you know, they've just switched the power on the new cables. We've had the cables up for years and they've not had any power going through. The powers were switched on, I think, about 3 weeks ago. I haven't seen a bird perched on the cable since they've switched the power on. The starlings in particular used to perch on it, and the crows, nothing on the cable. All I'm getting now on the pylons are some gulls and cormorants, because they've got big flat feet, they can sit on these concrete pylons. So yeah, we've lost a bit there. Indeed, the hobbies at Kingston Seymour, they were perching on the actual cables, although I expect they'd soon work out. And there's lots of other sort of machinery and that round the cables and bits and pieces that they could go on. But they used to perch on the old cables, so whether they could cope with 130,000 volts, but not the 400,000. Okay. Song thrush, about 3 or 4 pairs of song thrushes. Stable. I mean, in the early years of the survey, we were getting very few, perhaps only 1 pair. So numbers have come up, but they seem to have plateaued at about as I say, 3 to 4 pairs. But they do sing well, so we're pretty sure we get all the song thrushes. And if we get some mild weather after this cold snap, they'll start singing again early December, and they'll sing for a bit and then sing again in the spring. Okay. And mizzle thrush used to be a fairly common bird, but it's now scarce. Just 1 or 2 around. It must have been a lucky strike when we got one on the strawberry lawn while we were doing a survey. Cadbury Hill, there's probably a pair nest on Cadbury Hill, and probably a pair sort of over towards Kingston Seymour, but yeah, they're pretty scarce nowadays. Okay. Redwing is a winter visitor, so we'd obviously picked up a redwing in one of the April surveys that was still on its way back. Not seen many this winter, and somebody was saying that there were very few hawthorn berries around this winter. I've just seen odd ones, and we're well through into getting towards December now, so see what that means. Lots on the Somerset levels apparently. Okay. Yeah, well, what's that? That's one of my photos, that's why it's so poor. It's a blackbird, but not any sort of blackbird. One of our members got in touch with me and said there's this strange blackbird, and it was on the grass by the side of Arnold's Way. And so it's a partial albino, semi-albino, partial albino. And it was around for a few months, 2 or 3 months, and then didn't see it again. These birds tend not to have very long lives. Not entirely sure what it is. Other birds set on them and see them as something different. But blackbirds, well, 100 years ago, there were as few blackbirds as there are song thrushes now, and there are as many song thrushes as there are blackbirds now, apparently. So things do change, and have changed even before our memories go back. But yeah, so blackbirds doing okay on the strawberry lawn, as I say, they tend to nest in the hawthorns where they're fairly safe from predators. Okay. And field fares, like the redwing, they must have late migrants passing back. I've only seen a couple of field fares so far this winter. These are birds from Scandinavia that don't nest in Britain. They're basically winter visitors. But our birds will probably start going back at the end of February. But these will probably be birds that have been wintering in Spain or somewhere like that, and they leave Spain in February, and by the time they get to us it's April. And because they're probably going up into high Scandinavia, they don't need to get back there really until midsummer, until it's suitable for breeding for them. Okay. Yeah, spotted flycatcher. Spotted flycatcher. Sadly, just a passage migrant on these, a rare passage migrant on the strawberry lawn. They may nest on Cadbury Hill. There have been attempted nesting on Cadbury Hill. These birds used to be in every rural churchyard in England. Yatton churchyard apparently used to have them. I'm sure Kingston Seymour churchyard, with those tall trees and all the dark areas around there, would suit them well. And we have had passage birds in Littlewood, as I say, but Cadbury Hill. So this was a lucky strike, seeing one on one of their surveys on the line. Okay. Yeah, and robin, as I say, the same as I said for wren, really, that numbers have escalated over the last few years, and the mild weather's doing the pair a good, and they start singing. The reason we start the surveys at the beginning of April is to record the resident birds, because obviously the migrant birds largely haven't arrived by then, but the robins and wrens are already, have set up territories in many cases, and robins have probably started nesting. Okay. Yeah, well, this was a fluke. We had a fall of there, but 2 or 3 pied flycatchers came down by the pond. Somebody told me about them. So these are birds of the sessile oakwoods. Nearest ones will be Forest of Dean or South Wales. But it just shows what can drop in to the strawberry line. Tony said at the beginning about the wryneck, and I mentioned the fact that he'd seen a ring ouzel. These rarities do drop in. You know, if they're brought down by bad weather, they're not going to a plain billing field. They're going to look for something that looks reasonably like their breeding habitat, where they think they can be safe and feed. Okay. And stonechats have started breeding. Stonechats nest up on the Mendips, but they've started breeding. We've got a pair near the strawberry line, and possibly another pair down on Congsbury Moor, and there's some on Kenmore, and it's a fairly recent phenomenon that they've started breeding. And you know, when we got the first field, I think Natural England told us that it would be 25 years before it became truly organic, and maybe that's what's happening now, because they're insect eaters, so they need lots of insects in the grass to feed on, and maybe now the fields have been devoid of chemicals for long enough for them to be able to actually nest. Perky little birds and sit up very obligingly. Okay. House sparrows had this massive decline, said to have started in London when they got rid of the horse and carts and brought in petrol vehicles. Because when they had horse-borne traffic, the horses used to drop their dung in the street, which attracted flies, which they fed to their young, and then they spilt their grain and oats from the nosebags, which fed the adults. And once that finished and they went over to petrol vehicles with fumes, the sparrows disappeared from London. In Yatton, the numbers got pretty low, and there's been a slow and slight recovery, but things certainly aren't getting any worse. And as I mentioned earlier, they seem to be doing well on the Chestnut Park estate because they've got a mixture of housing and people, and they've got rough grassland and 1 or 2 nice hedges, and they're not too far from the countryside. They don't survive these days, sparrows. If a village or a hamlet is deserted, the sparrows go. They can't seemingly now be present where there are no humans, and yet they were on Earth millions of years before humans arrived. So there you are. Okay. And dunnock, yeah, we got a few dunnocks. Again, much more a garden bird, but there's a few dunnocks down the line. Difficult to say because they're very strange breeding system with various males and various females cohabiting and all that. But they're doing okay. But again, much more of a garden bird. Basically insectivorous. Even they've started coming to take seed off bird feeders now. So, you know, very much reliant probably on to some extent on food put out for them in gardens. Okay. Yeah, well, these are yellow wagtails down on Congsbury Moor. Yellow wagtails used to be a common bird on the moors, on the wet grassland, and they've now gone. And it's not that long ago that they certainly nested on Nailsea Moor and places like that. But now there's only just a few pairs on the big Somerset Levels reserves. But we did get one fairly recently on an April day, I think, when we were doing the survey. These are in autumn when they're not so yellow, and you're much more likely to see. I did see a few on passage this autumn. Strangely, although they were known as a bird of wet grassland, they've now started nesting up in Gloucestershire in arable, and also in some numbers on the fens in arable, which seems, you know, a complete volte-face. I mean, you couldn't think of a more different sort of breeding habitat than that. But so we'll see what happens. But a rare bird now, one we just happened to come across. Nice little birds. Okay. And pied wagtails, so we get pied wagtails, and occasionally they'll nest along the line. When we had the builders merchants in Yatton Station Yard, they used to nest there they'd put a pile of bricks up, and there'd be a sort of gap in the bricks, and they would nest in those gaps. And I think they still nest in stalls, similarly between the blocks. They're fully insectivorous, of course, and again, the organic nature of the strawberry line and the YACWAG fields next to it suits them. Okay. Meadow pipit, That's just a passage bird, again something else we picked up. We meadow pipit's mainly a passage and a winter bird, not the numbers that we used to get, I have to say, but sometimes get 10 or a dozen down on the fields. And this one the one we recorded, not necessarily this one, had stopped on the strawberry line and got ticked on the list. Okay. Chaffinch used to be Britain's most common bird. It's gone badly downhill since then. There aren't many. There's probably a couple of pairs on the strawberry line, but the numbers have really dropped, and they've now been struck by this trichomoniasis disease that had the greenfinches, and there's no great sign at the moment of the chaffinches recovering, I'm afraid. So, chaffinches at a fairly low ebb. They're seed eaters, so they should be able to do okay, but there we are. Okay. And bullfinches, we know bullfinches, there's 3 pairs. There's a pair at the station end, a pair in the middle, and a pair at the far end. And it's been like that for several years. They've got this very weak call. They're beautiful birds, arguably the most beautiful of the finches, but they've got a very weak call, but it is distinctive. And quite often if we don't see them, we're able to record them by their call. They just like thick bushes, scrub, that sort of thing, and those areas of the line suit them. Okay. And greenfinch, well, greenfinches were decimated by this parasitic disease, but they've come back with a vengeance, and there's probably 4 or 5 pairs down there now, and all around the village. And again, it's another species that sort of moved into the edge of towns and villages, presumably doing okay by coming into feeders. And they'll sit up on the wires, and they've got a twittering call and various calls and songs. And greenfinches, it's been really a remarkable turnaround from a steep drop down to going back up to, in my view, probably numbers even better before they had the disease. Okay. And linnets used to, a few years ago, we had linnets nesting down the line, down towards the Congsbury end, but we haven't seen them in recent years. But a few pairs of linnets do nest around the area, and we get more in winter and autumn. There was a big flock at the end of Wembley, about at least 100 linnets, and then they move on. So, yeah, we're hoping they'll come back to the strawberry line, but we haven't seen them for 2 or 3 years. Okay. And redpoll, this was a lucky strike, another one, lesser redpoll, so called because it's got a little red nut on the top of its head. And these are, we've had these in winter on the strawberry line, particularly there's some older trees down towards the Congsbury end, and they're feeding on older seeds, which I think is what this one's feeding on. But this was another lucky strike. We used to get them in Littlewood, but we haven't seen them in Littlewood for a few years now. But as I say, this was just a luck. That's what happened. But again, the strawberry line on this day in spring was suitable for this lesser redpoll to stop and then move on to where it was going to breed. Okay. Goldfinches, well, goldfinches, we thought they were taken over. Goldfinches seem to have either levelled out or been dropping down a bit now after years and years of going up. I mean, goldfinches used to be not scarce, but I mean, they're certainly nowhere near as common as chaffinches and greenfinches. And once they were the first birds really that got the idea of coming into gardens from the farmland and making the most of the food and then moving back and breeding, and the numbers went up and up. So yeah, there's several pairs breed on the strawberry line and they're twittering again. They tend to have a very long breeding season. Some will start breeding sort of in May time and others will be starting in July, so it's difficult to give exact numbers, but they're certainly doing okay still. Okay. Reed bunting, we know about them, there's 2 pairs. They're always in the same place every year, so it's low numbers, but at least it's been stable for a long time. So these are one of the few birds that are almost entirely seed eaters. Most seed eating birds need insects to feed their young, but reed buntings and I think cord buntings pretty much feed their young on seeds from day one. So rough grasses we've got on the strawberry line and indeed the adjacent YACWAG fields hopefully provide some seed for them. As I say, there's never been more than 2 or 3 pairs, and that's the situation now. Okay. So right, that's all. That's the 70 birds that over the 25 years, 25 full surveys and a half survey during the COVID year that we've come across. So we're just going to look at one or two of the birds that come around Yatton. You won't see the one at the front, that's a red-breasted goose. But the Canada geese, if you see a goose flying over Yatton, 99% it'll be a Canada. And I'm sure they're very good in Canada, but they're an absolute menace here because they outcompete the native birds and they make a lot of mess. They get in big numbers and that. So I'm afraid I'm not a great fan of Canada geese. Okay, but I am a fan of these. These are goosanders, and these have started appearing on the River Yeo in recent winters. They're part of the sawbill family, so they've got serrated bills for fishing, all the fish with. So the Yeo, it always looks pretty dead to me, but you know, if you can get 5 or 6 goosanders on there, then there must be some suitable fish in there for them to feed on. I did see a couple about 2 weeks ago. They were probably migrants that have moved on, but we might well get some after this cold start, and certainly in the new year. Anywhere from Congsbury right up to almost up to Wembley. Okay. And snipe. So we got snipe on the, particularly on the Kenmore Reserve and on Congsbury Moor, and this picture by Mark, I think taken in Northamptonshire, it's got the jack snipe next to it. So you've got the common snipe on the right and the jack snipe on the left. And that's a very rare picture to get the two together, and it does illustrate how small the jack snipe is. We do get a few jack snipe in with the common snipe, but not very many. And you've got to get very close to the common snipe normally to flush them. The jack snipe, you've more or less got to tread on them before they go up. But we did the snipe count at Kenmore a couple of weeks ago, and I think we got 28. But at the end of last winter, we were getting, I think, 70 or 80. So you get huge numbers of them. They roost on the wet fields in the daytime, hide away, and then go out to feed at night. Okay. Well, there's a picture of a common snipe. Okay. And green sandpipers. Green sandpipers have taken to our waterways in winter. They used to be passage birds. There's one or two breed in Scotland, but basically they're Arctic breeders, and they go right down to Africa for to winter. But more and more have been staying again with the milder winters, and they particularly like the river. When the river's low, as it has been until it still is low, there's some nice muddy edges for them to feed on, and also the reeds, when the reeds are dropped and produce any muddy edges. I mean, when we first saw these, the wintering population was said to be 900 birds, which isn't many for the whole of Great Britain. I think it must be a lot more than that now, but we've had up to sort of half a dozen on the field. 1 or 2 is more noticeable, and usually you flush them, you don't see that they hide away like a snipe, and they go off and they've got a big white rump that's pretty distinctive. Okay. We looked at herons and little egrets. Here's a heron and a great white egret. You can get some impression of that, how big they are. These birds only started nesting in Britain about 10 years ago. This year, 100 young were fledged on the Somerset levels. They've just had an amazing rise. And there's quite a lot now. Well, a lot. There are several spread over the moors. There were 30 on Cheddar Reservoir when they dropped the level to some maintenance work because the fish were all in the shallows and they were having a fine time. Now that we've had the heavy rain in October and the reservoir level's gone up, they've all moved on to the moors, and various people had, I think there were 2 or 3 on the Little River the other day, and the farmer on Tickenham Moor said he'd seen 2 or 3. They don't appear, I mean the number of herons doesn't appear to be going down, although they seem to feed largely on the same stuff, although I think herons feed more on rats and toads and non-fish items, whereas as far as I can see the great white egrets do tend to stick to the streams and the reeds to feed on fish. But yeah, a great success story, and so far don't seem to be affecting heron numbers. Okay. Red kite, one over Littlewood this morning. Someone reported one over this very chapel a couple of weeks ago. So kite's probably one of the most successful reintroduction schemes, if not the most successful. 30 years ago since they first started the releases for birds from Norway and Spain. The funny thing is now, we've got so many, we're sending birds to Spain because the population there's struggling. They don't nest, as far as we know, very locally, but it's going to happen. It just seems to be taking them ages and ages to move west across the country. We think most of the birds we get here emanate from the ones that were reintroduced into the Chilterns in the late 1980s, 1990s. But as I say, there was one over Littlewood, and they are around now. Most of the time they're seen over Yatton is in the midsummer, when the birds don't breed in the first year, so the youngsters seem to do this perambulation that seems to go from the Chilterns down to the south coast and along to the south coast. And some of them then head out to sea and decide it's not a very good idea and come back in again. And then they end up, there's been reports of 200 in West Cornwall, and then they gradually make their way back. And the ones we see coming over Yatton, a lot of the ones are drifting back towards the Chilterns. They've got very, very big natal instincts, these birds. If they could, they'd go and nest in the tree next to the one that they were born in. Okay. That's Yatton Church. Peregrine falcon taken by Higgy early one morning. He was out walking the dog, saw it, went back home, got his camera, it was still there. That's the peregrine for you. It can't be a bird, it doesn't move. If it doesn't move, it's got to be a peregrine. There's been I've had a report since then of one similarly on the church, and other reports as well. They used to love perching on the old steel pylons, but they do not like the modern T-pylons because it looks as if they have difficulty getting grip on the concrete, because they used to come onto the pylons to look for food, and then when they caught food, take it up and eat it, because when they're eating it, they've got to lift one foot up to pull it off. And I saw a peregrine having a job to balance. Emily got a photo of a peregrine the other day on one of the new pylons, and that's the first I've heard of for about 6 months. Whereas when we had the steel pylons, when you've got the sunny, in winter particularly, if you've got a sunny day and it was still, you've got a very, very good chance of seeing one. So the question is, will they take over Yatton Church? I mean, they're birds that historically were cliffs and uplands and as far away from people as you could get, and now they're in quarries and churches. There's some very known ones in Bath. If you want to go and see peregrines, go to Bath about early July. If they've got young, you'll hear them screaming, all the youngsters screaming to be fed on the church near Bath railway station. It's got a TV link, as has the church at Taunton, they're on the church at Glastonbury. Will it soon come to the point when, it's churches that haven't got them. So I've taken advice from the Hawke and Owl Trust about putting a nesting tray up for them. They've said that it's the best thing to do is to wait and see if we get a pair on the church, and they have to bind to the tower, as he called it. In other words, they have to. He said what'll happen is they'll attempt to nest, and the female will lay the eggs in a drain pipe or something stupid, and they'll fail. But once they've done that, it's worth putting a nest box up, and they'll come back the next year and nest. My hometown's Kettering. I don't think there'd been a peregrine there for 500 years, and they've raised 4 young on Kettering Parish Church this year. The church wardens aren't that pleased. They seem a bit worried about the pigeon heads that get left around the graveyard. But then that's the reason they come into towns. That's where all the food is. There's less food on the coast. There's much less food on the uplands. But pigeons, there's plenty of them in the towns. Okay. Coal tit. As I say, not on the Strawberry Line, but birds around the station in the village, conifers in the High Street, quite a few on Cadbury Hill. Okay. Marsh tit, the only one, YACWAG area at Cadbury Hill, and probably some on Kingswood near Colmsbury. They need the Oakwoods. Very small population, but seems to be holding on, no sign of it actually dying out. Okay. Nuthatch, most sedentary of our birds, never moves anywhere. Somebody had seen some of the Cadbury Hill ones, I think at the far end of Mendick Road, where the sheltered housing is, and that must have been a flight of 600 metres. That would be a long, long way for Nuthatch to go from his territory. So yeah, still a few pairs on Cadbury Hill. Yeah. Wheat ears we get passing through. We even had a wheat ear in Wheat Ear Road, and a man in Wheat Ear Road took a photo of it. So these are African birds that used to breed on Mendip, but don't now go much further north in the uplands to breed. A few come through in spring, but most in autumn. Again, they stop off. If you get a wet night, that's a wet night and a dry morning, that's always a good time to look. Birds get brought down by the rain at night, usually stay all day, and if it's clear the next night, go on. Okay. Grey wagtail, so we've got grey wagtails around. More of a winter bird, possibly one or two breeding out on the moors that don't get seen very often, but will come into gardens, to garden ponds. If you've got a big garden pond, you might well get grey wagtails in there. Okay. Seerskins, and our members in Congress, we get these in the garden. We think they must be nesting somewhere up on Kingswood. Mainly they're winter visitors. Again, feed on alder seeds in particular. Littlewood used to be a regular place for them. Now some years it's good for them. 2 or 3 years ago, the warden and I think it was in early March, and there were 150 in Littlewood. And obviously birds from further south moving through were stopped into Littlewood to feed on the alders. And we went 5 days later and there wasn't one to be seen. They'd all fed up and gone on. But colourful little birds, and sometimes seen on the strawberry line in winter. There's some alders down where the little footbridge is, where the path actually goes away from the old railway. Okay. Yeah, well, yellowhammer. Yellowhammer may be extinct in the YACWAG area. It used to be around Clavering and Brockley, but this is the first year, I've had a few bike rides down there, first year that I've not been able to find any yellowhammers. Very sad really, because used to be on Cappy Hill, used to be on the moors, but it just declined and declined. And the arable fields around Backwell used to hold them, but there haven't been many reports from there either. Okay. And I've saved the best bird till last, one of Jill's shots. This is a white-tailed eagle, not far away from here, at the Chestnut Park School. And the reason it's there is that before the school was built, there was some archaeological excavations, and that you probably know they found, 250 graves, something like that. But what they also found was the talon from a white-tailed eagle. And it was with pottery, so they could date it to being 400 years old. So in the 1600s, white-tailed eagles were flying over Yatton. And indeed, since then, one of my neighbours saw a white-tailed eagle coming over the Chestnut Park estate. He's not a bird watcher, but he knows what buzzards look like. This was twice the size of a buzzard. And that would have been one of the birds from the reintroduction project on the Isle of Wight, where some young birds have been released over several years. 1 or 2 are nesting now down on the south coast. But the young white-tailed eagles don't nest until they're 4 or 5 years old. And until then, they just do these great wanderings all around Britain, hundreds of miles. And I think most of them have got satellite tags on, so the people can track where they've been. There was one over Bristol a couple of weeks ago. They know that from the track, and there was one over Weston-super-Mare. So these birds are around, and they are likely to be around more because there's a project called ERW, which was about eagle reintroduction Wales, and there is a plan afoot now to reintroduce them to what I would call Monmouthshire on the far side of the Severn estuary. And if that's successful, there's not much doubt they're going to be coming inland and flying over Yatton, so something to look up for. That's the last slide. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening.